Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion. Hey, Kelley.
Hey, Erin. What's up?
Oh, not much. Just running around today. Yeah, on our spring forward. I lost an hour, so it's like, you know.
What are you going to do?
Time crunch.
With a person who needs 26 hours in a day.
Every hour.
Yeah. So, did you get time mixed up today, or were you pretty much on it?
No, I went to bed at a decent time last night preparing for the lost hour, but it's okay.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'm just looking forward to tonight when it's light still at 7:00.
Yep. We've talked about this before, but I just wanted to stay on this time and not just I don't want the switching. I like this time. I just don't like the switching back and forth.
Yeah. Well, we've got a really exciting podcast today. We've got a great conversation with Becky Garrison.
Yes, and I am going to intro Becky. So Becky, in addition to being an author, we're going to talk about a bunch of the different books that she has written and that are forthcoming, but also writes about craft culture, food, beer, wine, spirits, ciders, coffee, cannabis, which I was like, this is going to be an awesome, we're just going to be able to talk about so many different things. She's currently working on a book called Gaslighting for God, which is going to be coming out next year, and with Lake Drive Books, which we have spoken with David Morris from Lake Drive Books in one of our episodes as well. And additionally, Becky has had, during her tenure as a professional Christian author, she's penned 7 books. 7 books. My goodness. Okay. So we're going to have to just talk to you about like your craft for writing, because that's incredible. She was a senior contributing editor for the Wittenberg Door, the nation's oldest religious satire magazine, and currently serves on the board of directors. So you also hold a degree from Yale, and I'm sure, looks like a book on distilleries in Washington, the history of distilling in Washington. My goodness. So I love you're a real Renaissance woman, is what I can tell from your background. So welcome, Becky.
Oh, thank you. Very glad to be here.
So Becky, you have you were just telling us a little bit before we started recording that so you have a re-release of a book that you wrote in 2007, you said?
2010, actually. 2010. It covered a pilgrimage that I took from 2007, starting in Israel and ending right before Barack Obama got elected.
Okay. And the title of the book is Jesus Died for This? ?
Yes.
A satirist search.
Question is, okay, if you look at crucifixion, it's a pretty big deal. I'm not trying to be sidestep it, but we look at what goes on in a church. And I'm like, well, somebody actually decided that it was worth sacrificing his son, if you take the whole story, so that he could die, rise from the dead, and bring forth a new kingdom. If all of that actually transpired, why are Christians acting so pruny? Why is this? They're not really having an impact in the current world right now. We're in a state of huge crisis, to put it mildly, and there is no tutu coming. But there are people that are coming that are doing things these days, I've noticed, that are what I would call secular saints. So a lot of people are continuing the spirit. The question is, where are they continuing it? Back when I wrote that book, I thought that the church could be reestablished and reconfigured and renewed. I no longer hold that hope anymore.
What makes you feel like what shifted you from having that hope to no longer having that hope?
Well, I think I could just cite it. There's just been so many examples. I mean, every time the church could have done a prophetic voice, they issued thoughts and prayers. Or they said, we're going to protest. We're going to have these performative acts. But is anything actually transformed? we still have a nation that is greatly hurting, greatly suffering. And I think you can argue the last time the church really came together was the civil rights movement. My late father was an uber liberal hippie Episcopal priest, wanting to do everything, very involved in the civil rights movement. Screw the women's rights movement. They weren't interested. The Episcopal Church, and this is the liberals, they just weren't that interested in the women's movement. And they were definitely not interested in the LGBT movement. We're okay of gays. Maybe a lesbian if she dresses very properly. But they were not interested really in the full rainbow of people. The fact that you still have to fight to say, oh, we're going to appoint people based on, their spiritual qualities. You look at this, it's like run like a country club. But more importantly, even when they would have these new forms of church coming up, you still have the same problems. And a lot of what shifted my understanding was the awareness of church too. I don't think that we all knew how systemic the abuse within the institutional church structure was until Me Too and Church Too. I just thought it was me. I'm the cute little blonde when I was in my 20s getting my butt pinched. I just thought it was just me. I didn't know that every other woman, or not every other, but a lot of other people were experiencing the same thing. So we're now having a collective consciousness and kind of an awareness. But this is to be expected. I mean, if you look at the work of Margaret Wheatley that I'm quoting in Gaslighting for God, she says we go through these civilization cycles. And in her estimation, we're at the end of one. We're in the age of decadence. Where we're so concerned with celebrity, so concerned with minutia, so concerned with these little, and I think COVID for me was kind of like a crackdown of all of that. And as we're reemerging from this, I'm looking to see what are people wanting to form, and they want to form communities. They want to get together. They want to make connections. They want to make a difference in the world. And they seem to be doing it on their own without asking for permission from some institutional structure to do so. Right. And that is a huge shift, because it used to be, let's just see what the church will do, or let's just see what this certain nonprofit will do. And people are saying, we got to do it ourselves.
So to you, so when you say the institution of the church is kind of like, it's over, you think it's like I heard a writer say, I'm forgetting who it was, saying, there was the God is dead movement in the 70s, and now we're in the church is dead movement. But God is actually pretty alive. I
would say God is alive, but I used to when I was growing up, I would call myself as a joke a prenatal Episcopalian. My dad was a priest, and I said, you do the ecclesiology, the science, I was born Episcopalian. And now I call myself an agnostic, apophatic Anglican, because a lot of us have the traditions that we were brought up in, if we were brought up in them. However, one of the major shifts is that over half of Americans, starting around 2008, over 18 were brought up with no religion. They had no religious tradition. So I had an Anglican tradition that is part of me. It's for good or for bad. It's what it is. But people they left the church. The church didn't meet their needs. I think on the conservative end, they rejected their LGBT daughter, or they rejected the woman who had an abortion, or they covered up for their pastor's sins. And then on the liberal side, they also covered up for their pastor's sins, and they just didn't do anything. They didn't, we're going to march for this. We're going to do this. And the answer is, what did you actually do? The institutional church, they're closing down a lot of the places are closing down their denominational headquarters, or they're shifting them to smaller venues. What's keeping the church alive are endowments. If you really follow the money, there's enough rich people in certain areas that donated enough money, and that's what's keeping them afloat. But people they're not coming back to church. They may come to a specific church, like if a certain minister is doing something that's really dynamic, but they also may go to a local community center that's doing something dynamic. People are looking for where they can make a difference, and they're going to go where they can make a difference. This is why I'm not anti-religion. There are some priests out there and ministers, pastors doing incredible work. But it's the institution that hampers them. The priests, I know they're doing incredible work. A lot of them just left because the institution wanted the new shiny thing. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So the the comment that you made about just kind of like we're in this period of decadence, or the era of decadence. I've kind of said the same thing in the past. It's like that we're so sort of like, part of me is just like, is this just the nature of like being, the country that is like kind of at it's reached its peak, and now we're sort of like on the backslide of how, kind of like the fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, it's like we're like in that same arc, right? And then somebody else will eventually sort of take up the mantle of being the nation that is will rise to power.
Yeah, and that's what Margaret Whitney says at the end of a civilization cycle. I'm seeing signs of the pioneers, which is the emergence of a new civilization. That's where I like to focus my energies. And one reason I moved out to the Pacific Northwest is I'm away from the publishing empire. I'm away from in any kind of a media conglomerate. I'm away from Madison, advertising. People basically, I mean, yes, they make fun of Portland, and sometimes it's definitely justified. I mean, we are a city that likes to set itself on fire a few times too many. But, I think here there's a sense where people just want to explore the spirituality, the religious people and academics and media, all the different entities that inform how you're going to, function, basically are not here to the same extent. So people just explore their own spirituality. When I lived in New York City, people would always ask me, what do you do for a living? How do you support yourself? I mean, very, very transactional. They're trying to decide if I was a good financial match to be their friend. When I lived in Boston for a bit, it was asking about my academic credentials. Do I have the right street cred? Here, they just ask you, hey, what you working on? And that's what people want to discuss is, what am I working on? What gives me passion? You're looking at the beauty of what I create, not my checkbook balance.
I love that. Yeah. Your tenure at the Wittenberg Door, and I know you still work with them they have a Substack now.
They do. It's right now we're kind of a little bit of a dormant phase, but we'll see what ends up happening.
And so I'm curious about this. So your writing has been steeped in satire, and that's even in Jesus Died for This, a satirist search for the risen Christ. I'm curious how did you find satire? What does that mean to you? And what's the power in satire in religious writing?
Well, the power of satire is to hold the church accountable. You function similar to the court gesture, in that you're reminding everyone that the emperor doesn't have any clothes.
Yeah.
And if the person is healthy, the person has a healthy ego. They expect this. I mean, it's a lot of politicians expect to be satirists, religious leaders. It comes with being in a public figure, and sometimes they'll even take it. You're right. I'm a little bit of a horse's ass. We all need that kind of, to keep the person honest. The person who is an extreme narcissist will just lash out like crazy and absolutely let you have it. But then other people will tell you, thank you for smashing that idol. Because once you smash the idol, you can then see the glimpses of God that's happening underneath. Because I believe that most people entering the ministry are not psychopaths. A psychopath is someone who enjoys inflicting harm. But I believe some of them are inherently, the statistics seem to be showing, which we need a lot more research, that there's going off the charts of narcissism. I mean, the average person is like 1 to 5% of us are clinically narcissists. They're estimating in spiritual, both religious and secular communities, the number's as high as 25% or even higher. And I'd be willing to bet it is higher, because you look at it, so that's what we do. We kind of remind someone that you might have started out with a good vision, but then you got the book deal. Then you got the comfy pastor seat, or you got the spiritual enlightenment where everyone's coming to you for spiritual enlightenment. And unless you have a very strong, like Thich Nhat Hanh kind of support system for you, you're going to fall into the trap of thinking that your own shit doesn't stink. And it's human nature. And then over time, if a satirist can help keep someone honest, help keep them accountable, then that person hopefully maybe could do their vision without falling into that trap. Unfortunately, the power of the Christian social media, as we call it, the Christian industrial complex, is so intense. The push the platform. I mean, I've interviewed so many voices at the door where they started out beautiful, started out with this lovely vision. All of a sudden, they become a New York Times bestseller because their publisher pimped them out. Let's face it, most stuff on the New York Times is there because a publisher dumped a ton of money. thinking this one would chart, and they need so many bestsellers. It's a whole business racket.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think that's what we kind of do. And as far as to why I got into it, I tell people, if your late father and was a hippie priest, and I would say his alcoholism overrode his idealism. He died in the 70s, along with my earth mother, who also had her own addictions. And to me, but yet I wanted to follow that with what my father was doing, because he was doing a lot of really radical stuff. And I also have to admit, he was a flaming narcissist, and I say a peopleizer. He basically would have sex with anything that moved. And and an Episcopal priest. And this was not a pleasant package, but within that was somebody who, he was doing research in the early 60s for why were some kids joining the Jesus People movement as it got later on, and other people were joining SDS. What was it about? What was attracting students to fringe communities?
Yeah.
So I've always been interested in this faith on the fringe intuitively. Also my ancestor was Roger Williams, who, in addition to founding the state of Rhode Island, he was a pioneer of religious freedom. Rhode Island was the first state that welcomed even atheists to come in, and had the first constitution in the Western civilization granting freedom of what he was calling liberty of conscience, which is the right to believe as you wish. And I think that all those kind of things kind of melded together. And I somehow came across the Wittenberg Door, submitted a query, and they said yes. And then the moment something was published, this light bulb went off, and like, this is what I will do for the rest of my life. I was in my early 30s, and I was like, I'm just so glad I found what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Now, I could have picked something far more financially successful and different, but this is just what I felt I was put on the earth to do. Yeah. And I hope that everybody can someday have that light bulb moment of, this is what I'm here to do.
And then so do you feel like it's like your calling to this is this prophetic voice to kind of criticize, like be on the inside and criticize,
I would say that I'm now on the outside criticizing. I've left, when I left for the Pacific Northwest, I more or less said, I'm done with the Christian industrial complex. And a lot of that was just practical. With more people exiting the church, there were fewer outlets. And also the first thing when a newspaper closes and they start laying off, the religion reporters are about the first to go, which is why we have absolutely god-awful religion reporting. I mean, we have religion reporters that cannot distinguish between mainline, evangelical, and prosperity gospel. And if you cannot distinguish between those three, you cannot report on religion and politics. You have to know the voice of who is speaking, to how to understand their theology, to understand. So they now have the person covering religion who basically covers dog shows and covers other local community happenings. So the religious education in America is pretty much at a pretty low point for just understanding the history of how we got to where we are.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that was well. So I know Kelley and I both wanted to ask about this. Is the kind of the appetite for satire in contemporary culture, like that? One of the things that we've kind of noticed is like that there seems to be less space for, like, especially like kind of maybe like the younger generation. They have less appreciation for satire than I feel like is in the past. I'm curious if that's something that you've seen in your, like, in reactions to your own work, that people aren't kind of able to like understand what you're trying to, the nuance of what you're trying to do.
I think it depends on what I notice is that people tend to love it when you attack anybody but their target.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, for example, when I first started writing for the Wittenberg Door, there was no progressive religious media just about. I mean, there was a few progressive organizations, but there wasn't. Most of the people publishing were evangelical Christians, and they were publishing their material. And so we would satirize this, because the Door was set up as a magazine by Mike Yaconelli for youth workers to laugh at all the garbage they were going through in their churches. And that was the original intent. We also did some serious interviews to introduce to people who are putting their faith out in provocative ways. So it's kind of like you criticize those in power, but then you also uplift those that are doing the work of the pew. So it's always been a kind of a motto, kind of a twofold thing. Let's see what we can uplift if there's anything to uplift. Sometimes there isn't, but if there is, Let's try to uplift the voices that are doing the good while holding those in power accountable. And I discovered that once there's this book called God's Politics that got published around 2005. And all of a sudden, publishers wanted progressive books big time. That's when I got recruited for my first of now 9 books with Gaslighting for God. And that's what started it. Was the publishers wanted, oh, wow, look, we wanted this book. So I did Red and Blue God, Black and Blue Church. It turned out that as I started satirizing progressives, people that loved me when I satirized the evangelicals would start attacking me. I mean, absolutely creaming me. And then when I started noticing, let's say, abuses within some of the networks, like the U.S. Emergent Church Network, you started reporting on that, the hammering, the cyberbullying. I mean, it was on par with anything the Christian conservatives would dish out. And then when I exited the Christian space and I started reporting on secular communities like Shambhala Buddhism and Tantra Pujas, that kind of stuff, the backlash was equally fierce. So it made me realize that there was something going on here that wasn't about the particular brand of the faith, but the leadership characteristics of the people who could not handle any kind of criticism. And the research into narcissism was not there. This has only been about 10 years that this has been around. So I had no clue. Why are these people being such, whats? Why are they just all of a sudden turning on someone? Wouldn't you want someone to point out the fact there's abuse in your midst? Wouldn't you want someone to critique so you could have a healthy community? And it turned out, well, no, they didn't want. They wanted themselves to be in power. They didn't want to open up to a horizontal community where all had voices. They needed to be the one pushing the product.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the research on narcissism that you're like in the last 10 years, you talk about like spiritual narcissism. So I'm kind of curious, like, how is that different from just like, or is it different than just narcissism in general?
Well, I think what I would discuss is that in my book, there's all these different degrees of narcissism, and I'm not discussing the toxic person, the difficult person to work with, because those, I think, there's a lot of books written about how to deal with difficult people, how to deal with somebody that won't shut up. But if you tell them, please be quiet, you eventually can break it down and have a real conversation. I'm looking at somebody with extreme narcissistic energies. They lack empathy and compassion. And they also have no self-awareness for how their impacts impact others. So they will never take responsibility for anything that they do whatsoever. I am sorry that you felt that way. I am disappointed in you that my project didn't get off the ground. They're unable to look at themselves for any self-reflection and see what they did. The added dimension of spiritual narcissism is they add in the God eats. They add in you're going to go to hell if you leave this community. They are forming people. A lot of times people are looking for communities. I think this is more true now that we're becoming more isolated. People don't have their families next to them. They don't have their extended. You don't live in the same place we used to live. I mean, on my mom's side, I was related to 4 pilgrims, and I was tracing these women's histories. And in tracing them, I noticed they would stay for like a century in one town. And then all of a sudden they moved to another town. And they didn't move to another state to like another. So we don't do that anymore. So people are looking for churches. They're looking for places for community. And often the nature of a church, which is to love bomb you, to welcome you in, to say, we love you, we accept you. And all of a sudden, this is the church that gives you everything you've been looking for. So you don't realize that through the love bonding, you've now become trauma bonded into this church, which is not healthy for you. And I think that's another key difference, is it gives you the illusion of you have found a heaven here on earth. You have found this community that will meet all your needs. It becomes a major social hub. I mean, it's not any more, but it was this place where a lot of people went, and you just felt that, putting up with whatever you had to put up with was part of the bargain.
Yeah.
And there's also the fact that they say that you must serve me for God, whether it's, or if it's the Tantra guru, through having sex with me, you will become enlightened. So it's putting themselves as the vehicle where they are the source of the divine enlightenment. And it's done in very subtle ways. The progressive person can be, we're so much more superior to those crazy evangelicals down the street, or we are the frozen chosen is the favorite Episcopal kind of commentary. And then on the conservative side, there's, we are the ones who are being persecuted for our faith. And they will use a lot of different kind of languages and different expressions. I would say most narcissists in the church are probably covert. There's the exhibitionists are the ones that get on the news. They're the ones who are the best-selling authors. They're the ones booking the sold-out tours. But most of them are more covert. They've learned how to weave you in. They give you what you want. Exactly. And that's where the issue is, that we are in a nation with COVID. I mean, post-COVID, we're all searching for something. We're in a very discombobulated state. We're in a perfect environment for, I would say, these kinds of leaders to emerge and say, I have all the answers.
Yeah. Okay. I've got two questions for you based on that. One, first, the covert and the overt narcissist, I agree. Like the whole Christian celebrity and the, the kind of the guru and all that. I mean, I think that's definitely, prime real estate for narcissism. But I do think there are people, who have really like made a difference for me, and I've seen made a difference for other people, especially in light of kind of leaving a church and leaving that space that, where it's like the tight t-shirt wearing pastor, and you're just like, I can't handle this guy anymore. Like, I just feel like misogyny is kind of baked into this place. And then you start reading, some books and you're like, oh, I'm feeling pretty spiritually fed here. So my question is like, how do you discern, or maybe as a satirist, you don't have to, maybe you just, it's like blanket criticism because everybody is prone to this, but how do you discern kind of that celebrity narcissist, wisdom dealer to somebody who's really just, coming from a place of, deep care and wisdom that wants to help.
One key factor I've noticed is every spiritual leader, and I'm going to use Thich Nhat Hanh as an example. It's a perfect example because his work has like profoundly influenced me. He has an accountability system set around his place that is probably was ironclad and tight. A true spiritual leader does not go at it alone. They don't have brand managers. They don't have people or whatever you want to call. Now, yes, of course, if they're a major celebrity, they're going to need to have an assistant to handle their, fan mail. It is unrealistic to expect somebody of a superstar level like Brene Brown to actually write back to you. But she has set up a team of people that hold her accountable. And most importantly, one thing that Brene did that I was very impressed with, there was a gentleman who wrote a book about the Christian Enneagram. And I'm not going to say his name, but he was later found to have some abuse issues. Brene used her power to get her forward taken off his book. Yeah. That's someone
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, but I'm saying that to me is an example. It's just one example. Yeah. What do you do within your organization? You're going to make a mistake. You're going to endorse the wrong person. How does that person, do they have, and this is what I've been doing some interesting research into. There's two books, Humble and then the work of Richard Foster. The opposite of narcissism is humility. Yeah. Does this person have humility? And by genuine humility, what are they doing? In comparison, you take a movement like the U.S. Emergent Church. I went before, back in 2008, when I started hearing abuses, online, offline, including multiple accounts of sexual assault. I went to leaders and I was told, be nice. And this is a movement saying we're going to be religious. And if anybody says they're leaderless, run for the hills, it's not leaderless. Because I just did some reporting on this group called International Schools for Temple Arts, ISTA, and they claim to be leaderless. And yet, you go to their page, there's 9 responses to major allegations and major news outlets. They continue to not hold themselves accountable. And a true leader has a group of people around that will hold themselves accountable. And you can argue one of the major problems we're having right now in our political system is there's nobody holding the leaders accountable. The people are trying, but there's just too much corporate money involved. So, I mean, how does a leader handle an apology? Is it an authentic apology? Are you seeing genuine efforts to do wrong when they've made wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a few instances in the sex positive community where a leader was caught doing something he shouldn't have done. They agreed to go through an accountability process. So people can be redeemed. It is, if they are a narcissist, they won't. The odds of a narcissist seeking power, seeking healing is just too. We need to shift the conversation from protecting them and trying to rehab the next to impossible to helping with those who are survivors, those who are victims to it. Yeah. And the communal for me is the one that I always get into, which is the one that's saying, let's all co-create this community together. That's the language that I'm drawn to. We're all going to be drawn to different things, but I'm also drawn to the victim narcissist who says, they're so persecuted. Everything went wrong. And it's so understandable. Your heart just goes like boom, boom, boom. Because every empathetic, bone in my body wants to help them. But then I all of a sudden realized, okay, they just need money next month. They just needed me to do something. They needed me to feed their persecution complex. Mm-hmm. They didn't care about me. They just cared about my money.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's another sign to watch out for. I mean, I always tell people, have you ever tried saying no? A genuine leader will be okay. They'll understand your time constraints. They understand. A narcissist, you just left their supply. You were their helper supply. The moment you're gone, they'll replace you with another person. And they don't care about you. So that's something to think about. It's also to ask yourself, what am I seeking? Because I've had myself, I was looking for something. And because I was looking for that thing, I was blinded to some of the red flags. I so much wanted to find that thing. So a lot of it just recognizing the red flags. Because when you've been in a bad relationship or you've been in something, there often are red flags that you chose to ignore because you were getting something else out of it that was more important.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So when you're talking about narcissists, you're talking about these people who really have like they're not just like Christian celebrities. They're like, these are people who are committing crimes against other people.
Well, I would say not always necessarily crimes, but I mean, you can have something like Rachel Hollis has been doing a lot of plagiarism. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of these people. I would say the majority of Christians who make the bestseller list, New York Times bestseller list, as opposed to the Christian classics that we always, because the people that I read, Thich Nhat Hanh doesn't make the New York Times bestseller list, but his books always continuously. So I'm talking to people who do the pop. The week their book comes out, it pops.
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh's publisher doesn't need to send him on a PR tour.
Right.
I think that it's one of those, but it's such a temptation because you're really taught that once when I published my first book, I tell everybody, surround yourself with a group of accountability people. Just find some people that'll tell you when you start to smell a little too much, because you're going to do that. You're going to get so excited. You're going to get that review. You're going to get this podcast interview. You're going to be asked to speak, and you're going to get a little big for your britches. You just are. It's human nature. But you have somebody sit down with you and say, listen, stop being a jackass. And you go, oh yeah, okay, sorry. A narcissist does not have that. They don't feel the need for that.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like, if like from a political system standpoint, like I think about like, the famous like team of rivals, right? But like if you're a leader and you're like, I'm going to surround myself with people that I know will disagree with me, that creates, a healthy balance versus like, I'm just going to surround myself with a group of yes men or yes women who are going to just agree and go along with whatever I'm saying. But like, it's really like being able to have that ability to recognize like, I'm going to fall victim to this trap because it's human nature to fall victim to it. So I have to create some structures around myself to not fall into that trap when I get to that place. You have to really kind of prepare yourself in advance, which not everybody is going to have the level of self-awareness to do that.
Yeah. No, and the pressure to platform is off the charts. Like when I first started publishing, and it was the end of the era where you could be a writer. Now they expect you to be a writer, an editor, and a marketer.
Social media person.
And the problem with this is we're going to producing crap books because the best writers, this is why I'm so glad that I think the smart thing to do, I recommend with writers, is find an outfit like Lake Drive Books. They're letting me write. They're doing the marketing. They're doing the editing. Now, granted, this also means there's no advance. You may have to pay a bit of money up front, but there's a very good royalty structure at the end. So just kind of, I'm saying from a business standpoint, I think there's going to be new models emerging so writers can write. Because right now we're expecting us to be marketers. And the best writer is very seldom the best marketer. Because it's not our skill set. They're two completely different skill sets. And we're also probably not the best editors because we're not eagle-eyed. We're just creative. We're all over the place. We're throwing stuff against the wall. And I think we're going to miss a lot if we lose the writer-editor dance. And then when the book publicity team goes out and markets it, not saying the writer doesn't participate, but I think we're losing something there. So I'm looking for, and I think that's also what produces more narcissists, because the kind of person who knows how to market themselves is the one who gets the book deal. Where now, even with movies, if you don't have a certain number of Instagram followers, they're not going to cast you in a movie, which means we're getting the most glitzy, but are we getting the best talent? And that's kind of, but I think that when you're going to find other ways of doing, like Lake Drive Books is finding it for publishing, people will find other ways. Creative people have always found ways to get ahead. Is Patreon kind of replacing the kind of patronage that Beethoven and Mozart once had? So there's always new ways of looking at how to get the creativity funded and how to get your creative voice out there.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to something really important, especially for people who I think the three of us probably fall into this category, because there are people, and I do think that there are people who are really talented, have something important to say, and actually have the gift of being able to market. Like, I think that's, there probably are those people, but like, to kind of say you have to be, I've found in the work that I do, as soon as like the percentage of like, I'm focusing on getting my stuff out there as opposed to doing this stuff itself, you just start feeling so heavy and demoralized and it's like depressing. And so it is. So like, even so I work as a spiritual director, even like trying to get clients, like, market myself I just stopped. I'm just like, you know what? People will find me. And is it the best like financial, way to do that? No, but it like I can breathe. And then I know also that the people I'm working with are really people that,
Yeah.
And it's also important, I think, one thing I love about Lake Drive is like, if you have a book out, I mean, let's say 80% of books are going to sell like less than 5,000 copies. Most books don't sell that many.
Yeah.
But I think what I realized when I was doing, I did a piece on the Wittenberg Door Substack of Gaslighting for God to kind of test this idea and say, is anybody interested? And what I noticed is that we had about 1,000 subscribers, and I was getting a 50-60% reach with like people actually opening up the thing and actually reading it.
That's big.
The average person, I've been told that in marketing terms, if you get 3%, you're doing good.
Yep.
So what I realized is, in terms of how I want to market myself, I'm talking to my publisher about this, and they actually get it, thank goodness, is I have a small audience, but intense reach. Like the people that reach it will say to you, your book changed my life. Your book made me see something I didn't see. Yep. So I had a friend of mine, a futurist, Brad Sargent. I was going to go speak at this Christian conference in Poland. I knew nobody, and I was petrified. Like, what if nobody shows up? They don't know who I am. And he said, I want you to pray that those who need to hear you will show up, and those who will be detrimental to your talk will just stay away. And therefore, I was elated when I got like half a dozen people to up. It's a week of talk. I get like, because we really engaged. At the end of the day, 6 people we really engaged intently. So if you think of it from that standpoint, that it's not the numbers. Yes, the numbers are going to make more money. It's going to be more of this, but it's like, that's the impact that you had. Really, you have a very strong impact on a small group of people who will then spread it out.
Yeah.
That said, I think the interest in church too and narcissism is really, people are just finally starting to realize this is something going on wrong. So I'm hoping there's enough interest that people want to delve into it, learn the signs, so they don't have to keep beating themselves up and keep going from church to church. And also get help from their traumas. I mean, I'm looking at a world experiencing global PTSD, post-COVID, post all these current traumas. I mean, we clearly are, I hate the word dysregulated because it's used on TikTok very wrong, but we're not in sync with our own nervous system. Our world is out of whack, and I was writing all during COVID for spirituality and health about ways to keep yourself spiritually sane. Because I kept saying to people, I'm not saying from a health standpoint, we were not taking people's spiritual, emotional, and mental consideration. We were just looking at their physical.
Yeah.
We weren't looking at what does extended isolation do to the soul?
Yeah.
What does requiring people, not being creative? There's so many creative ways we could have continued with connection, but people are just not being creative. How do we include that immunocompromised person into our services? How do we continue to be an inclusive community? No, we decided, and now it's at the point where I'm having so many friends on my Facebook feed saying, if you even think Donald Trump is a human, then I want you're out of my life. You're dead. Well, okay, you just shut off any possibility to have conversations with people who just may have a disagreement with you, because people have different reasons for why they support things. And that's an advantage of being a satirist. I mean, I've interviewed people that think that I have no right to exist as a woman who's being in my own life. I have no right to my own income. And I can sit with those people and try to find out their story just because I've done it for so long.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I don't need a hot shower afterward. I'm not saying these are pleasant conversations to have.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But those of us that can have those conversations, I think, need to be having them. Because we continue to get increasingly polarized. And if we don't start finding a way to put people over politics, like just because your uncle put a Trump flag in his yard, or just because your crazy niece put a BLM flag in front of her yard, does not mean that there is no hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I would actually say, I think that that's the only way out really is to be able to try to have those dialogues, right? Like everyone just sort of retreating to their own silo, echo chamber, or whatever we want to call it, which is kind of what has happened, that's not going to get us out of the state that we're in. It's only through like being able to have connections with people, like Kelley and I were having this conversation the other day, but like this idea that, like the family unit, like in our kind of modern technology landscape, one thing that we've noticed is like this younger generation that's being raised, they're really close to their parents. That unit is pretty strong. The tribe, my online group that I really agree with, is really strong. But what is missing is like the village, which is this like interaction that you would just have normally with people who, may or may not agree with everything that you think, but you just are interacting with in day-to-day life. Like we're not having those experiences, and it's like I don't know how we create any sort of common culture without that kind of crossover.
Well, there are certain things you can do. Like I noticed that, to me, through music, anytime you go to a music event, like I've been my first Grateful Dead show, and there's something going on when Ann Coulter and the most radical hippie both like the same music. I'm not saying that I would want to be in a room with Ann Coulter for an extended period of time, but there's something about that music that for one moment unites you. Okay, take that moment. And I'm not trying to play Pollyanna and say, okay, you can erase everything. Yeah. But if you can get to that vibrational level for a brief period, what can you then achieve? And that's why I was also saying, to me, here in the Pacific Northwest, the brew pubs and tasting rooms have become a church. This is where people go. You go there, and it's not so much like the Cheers where everybody goes to hang out and just be all dysfunctional, but I've seen a lot of like community fundraisers are happening. People want to get together and hear live music. They want to celebrate the craft culture. They want to have farmers markets. There's a distillery, Copperworks Distillery in Kenmore, started having a community nights, trivia nights, bowling nights. This is what I was growing up. This is what church did. Church is where you went for social things.
Yep.
And when people say the number one thing they miss about church, it's the community. It's the fact that this was a place where I could just drop by and people were nice to me. Now, granted, they were nice. It might have been a genuine niceness, but they said, I really miss that. I really miss the fact that people were nice to me, and that's something we have to think of. And I think the word nice gets a lot. I mean, let me rephrase it. Instead of nice, I want to say kind, because I think nice is often used too often as a term of be nice, like to hold people down. But and I think that's what we want. We want a sense of connection. We're living longer, which is good news for medical. Hopefully it'll continue. They're saying that the health stats for Americans are starting to go back again, but hopefully that can be changed. And we're also living alone, especially women. We're living longer. Where do we go for our sense of community as we age? Who's going to care if you're not found? I'm thinking the poor story of Gene Hackman. Nobody wants that to ever happen to them, where you die and nobody notices you were gone. They miss you, but people, this whole sense of neighborhood connection, and during COVID, it was my local Buy Nothing groups that kept people alive, because the government couldn't get off their tail and give us money in time. So people do have, I believe in this, that people have an honest desire to connect. They often just don't know how to go about doing it. And it's not through, it might be through an individual church. I just don't think the institutions is where it's going to be.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot here about like joining and community and the importance of joining. And that comes up a lot with clients of mine too. And that people will come to spiritual direction just saying like, I am missing community. I am missing, and how to, and don't really know how to find it. And I just love that so you're writing about craft culture and like, all that. And I've never been to Portland, but I definitely think of it as like the streets are paved with like craft beer stickers and and there's barrels everywhere. And
that's a little bit, but it's more than just people coming together. For example, for a while, the craft cannabis community that kind of faded away a little bit due to some legislation. But you were finding, I was meeting at least women. I mean, here in Pacific Northwest, it's the women that are the healers. So it's a chance to meet people that are healing other people through the magic of cannabis. So when you're meeting a winemaker, this is somebody who loves the grapes. We have a winemaker here, Mo Montazi. He came from Iran in 1982 on a motorcycle, and with his pregnant wife during the Iranian Revolution, came here. He now set up this beautiful biodynamic winery of like close to 500 acres, where he sells these beautiful grapes to like 18 other people. But he also gives back to the immigrant community through fundraisers, through different ways, because we have the immigrants here that are largely picking the grapes. That's an example. He continues to give it back. Yeah. And you just walk in there and just, he's mentoring other winemakers into how to help them grow. There's a new wine, Folly of Man, that's going to be opening up. He's helping that winemaker, Tracy, and her husband, Erin, get things started. I look at Seattle. There's a gentleman named Charles Finkel who was just an icon. I mean, he was setting up this. He set up his Pike Brewing in 1989 and was at Fort with his wife. And at the forefront, this is in the 80s, they were always pushing, women's empowerment. He had a female brewer for a while. It's just amazing that the work that he was doing, and he's carrying that through with Jason Parker over at Copperworks. I'm saying, so this is not just going and having something fun. It's learning about supporting the farmer. Jason was telling me he's getting into looking for farmers that dry farm, looking for farmers that do salmon safe grain. They're starting to look at ways to make it better for the planet. I'm in a region, Oregon has more B Corp wineries than any other place in the state. We're home to 52% of the biodynamic wineries in the country, even though we only make 1% of the wine. So there's this huge growing culture. The Pacific Northwest, the American single malt just became a category. And this nation, this is where it was first started here by Steve McCarthy. And it's just amazing to watch how much this has grown into a culture where people value flavor. They value food. They want to know what's in the glass. They don't just go to a place to just swig it and leave. They want to understand the story. And so many people here have done so many amazing story. So it's not just going to a fancy high-end tasting room and having a high-end experience.
Sure, yeah.
It's about immersing yourself in the soil, immersing yourself in the land, and seeing, exploring what is that like when you can taste the soil.
So, I mean, yeah, so it's not just like a meetup, but it's really like a church, right? You're really gathering people around a story that they are invested in, passionate about. And so they're not just meeting up, they're really deeply creating community.
Yeah, and they come together, during I did a story, this was winery called Brooks Wine, and during the wildfires, when they lost all of their crops, they couldn't buy the crops, they still went and gave the growers money. There's a sense of wanting to help community. Nicholas Kristoff is forming Kristoff Farms in the Yale Carlton area, and one of his goals is to make this rural area, revitalize it. This is an area that's been decimated by meth and addiction, and the rural poverty in Oregon is intense. It's really we're number one in fentanyl.
Oh, wow.
So this is there's a whole nother lot of reasons for that, but there's a lot of suffering going on with a lot of rural people, with a lot of loss of agriculture, loss of family farms. And so the Kristoffs are like, how do we do this? How do we go back and create community? They started creating a book club around their ciders. So people get together, they have these conversations where you can have conversations with Nick and his wife, Cheryl, over different issues. So I think there's a lot of different ways in which people are just, using their family farms, using their, own abilities, just to kind of, how do we do something better and create a community?
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, part of that too, I think a lot about like, like what you're describing, we call it like the village, right? But like how much of that has to do with both your environment and like natural environment, but also like the built environment that allows for sort of like this facilitation of, organic connection between people. And it sounds like, where you guys are, there's just such a rich natural landscape that like that's what you're like tapping into this rich natural landscape in order to like make nature the church, so to speak, right? Like you're creating something from nature. It's awesome.
Well, you also have to think that this is an area where, people here get all bent out of shape if you have a place that has 4 or 5 locations.
Yeah.
You can go throughout most of Portland. What you'll notice in Seattle too, no fast food joint, no fast foods, no chains.
Yeah.
You notice them in certain areas, and I hate to say it, they tend to be areas like around the convention center, or it might be in some lower income neighborhoods. But generally speaking, people here do not want fast food. We don't have a lot of chains. We'll have a local chain, but they don't have. I can't remember the last time I went into a Wendy's, or people make fun of that stuff.
Yeah.
I was listening to Ezra Klein this morning, his op-ed, and he's talking about how people are leaving these big cities, and how the Democrats can't claim to be for the working man if you can't have a community that where working middle class people can't afford to live, and like people are like fleeing. And he talks about how it's definitely an interesting essay, and he has a book coming out about abundance, and I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about, is this idea of people creating communities that take care of one another, so that you're really living, like you said, like in alignment with your values. And it creates a community of abundance where these aren't just things that are, but there's a richer, fuller life available in these spaces.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm kind of trying to really want to push, because it's not, I'm not on TikTok because that's not my demographic, but it's also, I think, when I was researching, W. Keith Campbell said in this book, The New Science of Narcissism, he was noticing among his children they were starting to move away from the celebrity endorsements. And I'm thinking, the most classic example is the pushback that Kamala Harris got for donating over $1 billion for celebrity endorsements. And people were like, wait a minute, not just her, but a lot of other big name celebrity endorsements. People are starting to push back. Like, you just, wait a minute, this is a paid endorsement. I thought you believed in this cause. I thought you believed in this person. And then to discover that, my God, someone was paid $20 million. These were all paid to play advertisement. There's a huge pushback. And it's also, I think, from a writing perspective, I've seen this in the travel industry. There's a huge uptick in looking for influencer sponsored content. It's about to go away. Because AI is going to replace most sponsored content within 5 years.
Yeah.
So I think people are going to start to, and they're starting to catch on to this. They're starting to catch on to the fact that, this doesn't feel genuine. We've had too many Fry Festival incidents where people are waking up now. They're starting to realize, wait a minute, but the challenge that I was trying to have is, okay, so you saw Carl Lentz caught with his pants down on Hillsong, but yet you love the vibe of Hillsong. So how do you find a church that gave you what Hillsong gave you without the other excesses? And the argument is you probably could within that network because it was just so prevalent. When you ever have something that is so cool for school, so cool, so hot, why did I want, and this is the question to ask yourself, why did I need to be part of the cool kids crowd? Why did I need to go to the coolest, hippest church? And I had left New York before Hillsong came along, but there was another church, a Times Square church, that was there before them, and there was always the latest church that everybody had to go to be seen. This is where you're going to meet the coolest dates, you're going to have the biggest fun. Why were you attracted? Or maybe he's this enlightened guru that you kept hearing rumors about, that he was a little pansy, but why did you keep going back? And this is not victim blaming, but it's to assess for yourself, why am I drawn to these communities? What am I getting from these communities? Because otherwise you're going to rinse, recycle, repeat. I've seen so many ex-Christians go to an ecstatic dance place and they make the exact same mistakes. They're conditioned to look for an authoritarian figure. And therefore they see this guru, whether it's the pastor or it's the tantra teacher, as the person who's going to give them all their enlightenment, who's going to give them what they are seeking. And to help people to find that on their own, so they don't need to stand up to someone as the ultimate authority, but to find it within themselves. And from then you can then find more communities that are horizontal, but they're also not going to be as interesting. They're not going to be flashy. I mean, Hillsong was a superstar flashy show, and you're not going to see that when you go to a brew pub with a nice little guy and an acoustic guitar and a mic. It's not going to be the same spectacle.
Yeah.
Yep.
Erin, if you haven't seen the documentary about Hillsong in that church, and
I haven't,
you should watch it for sure. I mean, there's a lot of documentaries about. Have you seen Becky, the one that Kristen Kobes-Dumez did on? I have it on waiting for me, but talk about like Christian narcissism. I think in the clip, there's a clip of a pastor standing up and kind of confessing, yes, I did sleep with that woman and blah, blah, blah. And then the next thing you know, like the entire congregation stands up and starts applauding.
Yes, I did see that because I believe that Krista Brown, who is one of Lake Drive's authors, is in that one. Yeah.
Okay.
I've seen it. I was watching a lot of them. There's a certain point at which they're called cult porn. And
cult porn.
Skeptical is that most of what we're dealing with are not cults. Because you look at cults, it requires the triad: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. Most of the people, I would say, are not psychopaths, and that I think they don't think that what they're doing is wrong. They think what they are doing. My will is God's will.
Yeah.
Or God's will. I am. So they kind of reverse the Lord's Prayer. They kind of invert it, so it's about themselves. I don't think they enjoy hurting other people. They don't think they're hurting.
Yeah.
They think that they're. I believe that most abusers do not enjoy the abuse.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't think it's a cult. They also, some of the leaders don't have the full Machiavellian nature to want to do anything to get ahead. I mean, to get into some of the cults, like with ISTA and certain things, you have to be I don't want to say demonic, but I mean, that's when you start listening to stuff that gets demonic. It gets illegal. It's getting into the unethical. But the difference would be a malignant narcissist, which is the extreme narcissist, doesn't think they're doing anything illegal. They think I am entitled to this money. Whereas I think a psychopath, from what I understand, and I know the research is still shifting on this, but it seems to be the psychopath seems to enjoy inflicting harm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
it's is totally morally neutral even.
Yeah. But I think that's why I don't think that, to me, the stuff doesn't quite rise quite to the level of cult. I mean, there's definitely a lot of ostracism, and one of the main reasons why people don't want to go is that if you leave all your friends, because they will tell you, I mean, you leave a community led by someone that's in an enlightened church. Once you're gone, most people just don't bother checking in with you.
Yeah.
And that's another sign for me, is that if you're looking at a group and you're kind of questioning it, consider stepping back for a month. Just take a month off and come back. A healthy church is hey, I missed you. But a non-healthy church, everything you did has been replaced. You were replaced. And I remember there was one church I recall when my grandfather was dying, and I put him on the prayer list. And this was a big deal. This is my last living relative. I lived with my grandparents. I was in my 30s, but this is a very sad moment. And nobody bothered to contact me. But the first thing I did get a letter saying, "Where's your pledge?" Because I decided, okay, these people nobody wants to call me back and say, give me a prayer request and help me with my grandpa. I'll just find out a church. But then they sent me a bill for pledging. And I'm saying that's an example of, do they miss you? Were you missed for just you? And I think that's something to think about, because a lot of communities are like, you go to a bar, I haven't seen you for 6 months. Good to see you.
Yeah.
They simply acknowledge the fact that I'm glad to see you.
Yeah.
It may sound simple, but to me, it's a very good test, because when you're in a certain communities, they don't really, they missed your money.
That's like
they
it's
missed your volunteer time.
Yeah.
It's transactional.
We're training. Yeah.
I always think I want to be a part of a church, and I do think the church I'm involved with, like I want to be someplace where it matters that I'm there, not just it matters that somebody's there, right? And that's not like, you could tell, like, I just want it to matter. I want it to matter, like, what the I don't know, the special sauce of everybody brings makes it what it is, right? Like you were talking about co-creation, right? That it's a horizontal space as opposed to a vertical space.
Yeah, I love that. I love that way of thinking about it. I think that's like the right metric, right, to look for, I think, in the communities that you're seeking. I think that's what, it's like, we'll do like book clubs. I'm in a couple different book clubs. Like that to me is like the kind of community, because it's about, just like this group creating, constructing something and together. And it does matter, right? It does matter who's there and who's not there, and like what ideas are brought forward. And those feel like the healthiest, places.
Yeah. And the thing is, these are the kind of communities. Like I remember, that there was, when I moved into one place, there was a welcome lady, the woman who did the welcome, it was a beautiful welcome, but then she kind of dropped what church she went to, and I didn't know, because I'm a religion. I had an MDiv degree. I knew what it was, and I just went, "Oh my God!" I just felt that was like a false recruiting flag. Like they had this church, this evangelical church, had somehow managed to get themselves ingrained into the local neighborhood welcome wagon.
Yeah.
So that was kind of. So I think you have to look at. But I think when you go to something, to me, it's just not what do they have, but am I able to make friends here? Am I able to make genuine friends?
Yeah.
And it's also try pushing back a little bit. I mean, just, like if somebody says, all of their agenda, well, have you looked at all alternative ideas? For example, I left one church. It was a very liberal cathedral. I asked them once, this is during the Iraq War, would you let George W. Bush get communion here? If he showed up?
Yeah.
The answer was no. I said, okay, I'm out. Do you feel that if they start, I get very skeptical of churches that put the American flag and the Christian and their denominational flag. But I also get very concerned when I walk in and there's a whole ton of political stickers.
Yeah.
Both sides, right?
You support BLM, and then everybody's white.
Yeah.
All this BLM stuff all laying around. Oh, it's great. But then you go up there and almost like, everybody's serving me as white.
Yeah. What are you doing to actually change the makeup of your church? Yeah.
I went to this gay affirming church where Rob Bell was speaking, and I noticed all the ushers were men. They were gay men. I mean, some of them were gay men, but they were all men, and then let's also ask them, follow the money, check their funding streams. Like Rob Bell claimed he was this progressive pastor, and I asked him, one of his elders was Betsy DeVos. And Betsy DeVos gave him millions that let him launch the Numa videos that launched his career. So I asked him, if you're, in front of this congregation, about this, are you going, what is your take on this? You say you're pro-LGBT, but you took all this money. He called me a plant. That's another pretty strong sign you're dealing with an extreme narcissist. Are they, willing to change? I mean, if you took money from a person who has harmed gay and lesbian people, what could you do with that money? Would you want to say, I will donate money to help, Project Trevor. I will help, the Trevor Project. I'll do something. What are you going to do with that? Instead, no, I'm going to go surfing. And, she was just one of many. You can't just dismiss this. This was, so you look at those kind of things and eventually pay attention to your spidey sense. I mean, I've ignored my spidey sense at my own peril because I wanted to be part of the crowd.
Yeah.
When you're getting the sense this is not okay, and no one should be sacrificed at the expense of the group. And I've heard this said that, sometimes we have to make sacrifices. This is the person who is the sacrificial lamb to make the whole group go well. This is the person, the pastor's going to be taking his abuse out on this one person or these few people. And just because it's not happening to you, and I've noticed most people cannot comprehend that the abuse has not happened to them. It couldn't have happened. So to develop your empathy, start by believing survivors instead of protecting perpetrators is one of the key shifts that needs to happen. And for me, for that to happen is start believing them. Now it's pretty easy. I can count on one hand, literally the number of times I've heard a false allegation that proved to be, but often the victim is not lying. And if they are one of those globally needy that runs around trying to, like a victim narcissist, trying to get attention everywhere by causing drama, it's going to be exposed pretty quickly. Just do a few phone calls around and you can tell this is the one person who is mentally challenged and is really causing havoc.
Yeah.
They are in the extreme minority. The person who is so globally needy that they just keep running around from church to church looking for ways to dump and ways to cause trauma. Yes, those people do exist, but that's the minority. Why all of a sudden, this major person who did all this volunteering at your church is all of a sudden speaking out? Why would they do that? Why would they risk their volunteer position to speak out? So I think starting to get more tuned into when you hear stuff. I've tuned stuff out thinking, that person is just being immature because the person was acting out. I didn't realize they were being triggered and acting out of their sense of trauma. I did not have that knowledge. I just thought they were being a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Now I'm seeing it's something different that we need to look at and need to take into consideration.
Becky, do you think this is that second question I had before? Do you think that the Christian nationalist movement is a trauma response in some way to kind of just what the evangelical church has done?
I think there's a lot. I'm not an expert in this particular realm of the field, so I don't want to speculate, but I would say that if you have to, there's a lot of been spent about how the Democratic Party, starting with Reagan, lost the working class.
Right.
And with the Clintons, they did that whole neoliberal focus. History has shown that people are prone to join cults when they feel abandoned.
Yeah.
Completely abandoned, completely rejected. And then people come along and tell them something that they want to hear.
Yeah.
And I question how many people really believe it. Like, for example, I question how many people who even joined the KKK in this original formation, the South got screwed after the Civil War. There's no Reconstruction was designed to destroy the South.
Yeah.
And when you tell people, you take everything away from people. You know, people lost their businesses during COVID. People lost, not just their life. I mean, I'm not dismissing this, but people, when you lose your business, you lost your family, you lost a lot of things. You are lonely. You are sad. You are PO'd. You are prime target for someone to come in and get and help tell you that it's not just you. You know, you lost that. I mean, this whole blaming other people for losing your job has been going on for quite some time. You know, every time we had a new rush of immigrants into the United States, they were blamed for everything.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, look at how the Irish were treated when they first came over. It was not pleasant. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of them went into firefighting and cops, the Irish and Italians, because, you know, the history of only letting the Jewish people do the dirty jobs like money and, you know, Hollywood. We've always had this history of, you know, who is the other, and the more we other people, this is going to create. I mean, as far as the factors that led into Christian nationalism, I stopped getting Faith in Politics newsletters after the 2016 election. My reason for that was all of a sudden I started seeing evangelicals for Hillary. Then I saw evangelicals for Biden. Then I saw Christians for Kamala. And I was like, oh my God, you guys just fell into the exact same religious right trap. I saw the formation of the new moral majority, as though the original moral majority wasn't bad enough. So you start to find the progressive groups forming the same coalitions that the religious right did around their particular issues. You know, I mean, people forget the religious right was not founded around abortion. It was founded around segregation.
Right.
And could you go back to where it was formed? And now I think there's a tendency of people to want to just form alliances around affiliations so they all can, you know, feel that. As far as the rise of Christian nationalism, you could see it coming as they were losing the war. I mean, you saw this with Family Research Council. They're doing Custer's Last Stand. They know they've lost the culture war, and I think they're just now fighting to the end. That's my As far as the rise of religious right, it's not just the U.S., it's around the world. And I'm going to leave that to political experts to dissect why we're having this massive rise. But, you know, I think we're all now desperate for a tutu. And the tutu isn't going to be coming, so we have to decide to do it ourselves. We don't have someone like him that I just don't see anybody emerging who has that gravitas right now. Yeah. But to wait for one person, I mean, what can we do on our own? You know?
Yeah. I was talking to a friend the other night, and she said that the thing that I realized that I did wrong in all of this, you know, like what's my culpability is I was expecting my party to save me instead of doing the work that I want my party to do.
Because the Democratic Party, I mean, if you look at it, it's really bizarre that just to think that Richard Nixon was more liberal than Bill Clinton in terms of what he actually, in terms of his actual policies. I mean, the man was, you know, his paranoia did him in, but he actually opened up trade to China. He created the EPA. He was doing a lot of really progressive legislation. Clinton is the one who did Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Clinton is the one who ended work for welfare. You look at what the policies that Clinton put in place that really shut out a lot of local, you know, union people. And the fact is, we're still, I think, reconciling to the fact that, you know, we did have a, you know, perpetrator in the house, we now have to admit, committed sexual harassment. We, you know, Monica was right. And I think watching all these women, you kind of moving out. I mean, what concerns me the most is watching all the baby boomers that won't leave. And here's where the Republicans really have an advantage. Look at how young some of their people are.
Yeah.
And Obama did this. I interviewed for one of my books on new forms of church. I interviewed the person who was working with Obama on his social media campaign. And he thought he was crazy. But Obama was able to use social media to reach out to young people in a way that nobody else had.
Yeah.
As soon as he left, what do? We had the most diverse candidate list in 2016 among Democrats. Who do they give us? Hillary. For the second time. In 2020, we had another list of interesting candidates that they might want to do something. Who did they give us? Joe Biden.
Yep.
And then who did they give us for the vice president? Someone who had not even won a single primary and was not a preferred candidate among primary voters. I mean, if you look at who they had voted for in 2016, 2020, it would not have been Hillary, Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris.
Yep.
So the voters felt for 3 election cycles, you completely ignored me. Screw you, I'm going for Trump. And I think if it had been Bernie Sanders, they might have gone for Bernie Sanders. You could tell by the interest in Bernie Sanders versus Trump, there was an interest in people for something populist that was different.
Yep.
And the politicians just gave them same old, same old. And I'm going to leave that up to the political analysts to dissect that. I'm looking at it more from a religious perspective, and a similar dynamic has occurred where, we had a good example, the Episcopal bishop, we had Michael Curry is speaking to the whitest community ever when he preached at the royal wedding. I mean, you don't get more WASP than that.
Right.
But you really couldn't call him, I mean, this is as WASP, this is as stiff upper lip, this is as frozen chosen as it gets. And he's preaching at the first interracial marriage of a royal family member. There was no curriculum developed around his sermon. There was nothing to do to help spread that sermon. Oh, it was a great sermon. It got an international press. Boom, it just went away. And that's what the church would do. It's like we're going to have this lovely convention where we're going to do all these great, incredible things. And then, boom, it goes away.
We're not going to do anything to, extend the reach and make sure it really is soaked into the.
Yeah, because I did this thing when back in 2000. This is why you said I had the hope back then. Around when Jesus Died for This came out, I wrote 3 books for the church publishing, the Episcopal Church's publishing arm on new forms of church. Because what we wanted to do is in the UK, the church is so decayed that they're letting these fresh expressions of church emerge. Like local communities are letting them just try this, see what works. They're doing theology pubs, a goth mask, whatever it might be of interest to work. And I thought, we want to bring this over to the US. So these books were designed to help people forming new forms of church. It turned out that instead of helping to promote these books would need a lot of promotion, a lot of education to help people shift the paradigm. Instead of that, they chose just to meet the people's demands. So they did these videos of Brian McLaren, Nadia Bolz-Weber, Phyllis Tickle, different people talking about church. And it's no, I'm not talking head church. I'm looking at this stuff from the grassroots level. Let's bring these grassroots practitioners. Let's meet the person who's doing the brew pub in Bristol or doing different kind of interesting projects and these really interesting things. And the church was just nah.
Yeah.
Everybody's asking us for the big names. You got to give them the big names. So the church has lost its ability to be a visionary, and I keep going back to Tutu because, Michael Curry could have been a Tutu at that moment, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
There's all these opportunities, and you don't see them until hindsight. You start looking at this going, but I think the church is incapable of change because it's just incapable of self-reflection as an institution. I want to be very clear on that because I've seen some individual churches, but they're really struggling. I mean, in some ways for them, it might even be better if they could just disassociate themselves from the denomination and do their own work, because by being tied to the denomination, they're forced to give money, they're forced to exert resources to comply with the denomination.
Yeah.
I'm 100% with you. I wrote something on my Substack about reimagining the church and what it would, and basically my thesis was the church moves too slow. Erin and I have both been in education, and education, change in education moves too slow for how we interact as human beings and how we take in how we learn, how we grow. We know more and more all the time, but these institutions haven't moved at the same pace.
And I'm not in favor of just the way things can get totally annihilated, but sometimes I think it's good for a church to all of a sudden lose all of its endowment. What happens when you don't have money?
Yeah.
And you're forced to get creative.
Yeah.
That's when I think the real issue happens, when you stop hitting people up for money all the time. What can we really do at the grassroots, level? And now we have to get creative. We have to think of what we can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I going to do? I'm going to start a brew pub in my neighborhood.
I'm with you. I'm
Yep.
with you. I'll join that. I'll join that church. I am definitely a church of the cocktail. I like that.
You know, and I think I also wanted, because I did this, I posted this in my article on the brew pubs that I wrote for this humanist website called Only Sky, posted on the Wittenberg Door fan page. And I got accused of promoting alcoholism. And I just want to make one thing really, really clear. I'm talking elevating craft. My dad got drunk off of Southern Comfort. My extended family is like riddled with alcoholism. So, but I'm telling you, they do not take the stuff. The stuff is used as a numbing substance for them. It is not a celebration of craft in the least. So I just need to make it clear that yes, I am fully aware there is a major problem of alcoholism, and also I discovered in my family, alcoholism is very carefully. The traits are very similar to alcoholism and narcissism. The difference is that if an alcoholic is not a narcissist, once they sober up, they're a beautiful, changed human being. If they are a narcissist, it's like, oh, well, I guess that didn't. The personality traits are still there. It's not they're just not sloppy and drunk, but they're still just. And the thing is, I think we all have a right to want to know. And the good thing is, we're doing a lot of shifting here. Overall, I mean, we're now at the point where my mom could not leave my dad because she couldn't get credit. Because remember, women couldn't get credit until 73. We're now in positions where we're looking at new forms of community. A lot of people are not getting married. A lot of millennials and especially Gen Z are saying, we're just not going to get married.
Yeah.
We're not going to have kids. And yes, I'm aware of that trad wife. Which gives me the total creeps. But I think that's, for some people, this is to be expected. You know, they wanted, with everybody saying, you know, it's not make your own God, it's not do your own thing. It's just looking at this. I think a community can help hold you ethically responsible, so you don't become a libertine. You don't become some kind of a renegade who's off in an incel off in the basement doing something dangerous. Because when you're by yourself for too much, most of us do not have a hermit type personality where we can grow and flourish in isolation. It is not a healthy way to be. And for a lot of people, you know, if all your interactions are online, that is not healthy.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah. We definitely agree with that and have spoken to that a lot. Yeah. Becky, there's so much good stuff. I feel like we could just keep talking to you forever, but we are so grateful for your time. Can you tell our listeners about ways that they can find your books and find your writing online or in bookstores?
I think if you go to Becky Garrison, www.beckygarrison.com. I'm also on Facebook author page, Becky Garrison writer. And then Instagram is Becky_Garrison. I post my writings on those general places. I do have a Substack. It's called Gaslighting for God that I have set up, that I'm doing some of the writings on that. But the author page is where I put all of my articles as they come up, whether it's about alcohol or community or craft or religion, whatever they are. That's the repository where they all end up getting posted.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Yeah, this was awesome.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Atheist. If you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the episode with a friend. We really appreciate our listeners. It's because of you we keep growing and connecting with new people.
We always love hearing from our listeners. Get in touch with us at atheistpodcast.com. Follow us on our socials or leave a comment on this episode.
Atheist is produced by Justin Sywell of STL Podcasts.
Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.